your relationship with God really starts to get strained, because it's just like, if you're going through hardship, cast your cares upon God, and He will sustain you. Cast your cares on God, for He cares for you. And I'm just like, I casted my cares on you, and here I am, unable to sleep. I'm still eating like this because I don't know. Nothing feels like it's working. The meds made me anxious. The meds made me feel, they made me feel like I was gonna die. They're actually like, panic attacks are normal. So it's like this thing, like it started to really weigh down on my relationship with God. And anyone who knew me at that time, or even before, they knew that, like, head over heels in love with God. Like, our story is radical, it's romantic, it's beautiful, and He's beautiful and radical and romantic. But then I was just like, okay, Lord, so you haven't changed. You're still good, so there must be me. Deem, I'm unlovable, because if I was lovable, or if I was malleable, all these professionals would have been able to help me, or you would have been able to help me by now.
Relationship with God is hard for us as human beings. It really is, because He absolutely is our Father, He's our friend. I mean, He describes Himself in such relational terms from the beginning of the Bible all the way through, and that is who He is. But I think for me personally, the thing that frustrates me with God is that He's not human. Now, Jesus fully is human and fully God, but God is, He's other than. That's what holy means. It just means to be other than, to be set aside. And I think what really frustrates me is that God is so healthy. He is so together. He has nothing to prove. He's got no games. He is completely unfiltered. And that undoes us. Because the way we've grown up, even if you had the best parents in the world, they were not perfect. So that means we are not perfect. But God is. God is literally perfect, and He doesn't play our games. He doesn't deal with us the way we want Him to deal with us. And so I think this is where disappointment with God becomes a real thing. Because again, God will not do your responsibility for you. Not because He isn't kind or loving, but because He knows that for you to step up and stand in your authority, for you to step up and take responsibility. God invites us, He calls us, He draws us, He woos us, He romances us, He wants us. But we have to make the choices. We've got to decide if we're going to come. And He doesn't force us. He doesn't drive us. He doesn't manipulate us. God is not a puppeteer. He's done everything He can possibly do to help us. He loves us so much. He has proven it again and again and again and again. And for us to enter into a relationship with God, this is why the New Testament talks so much about submission. We don't have to do anything, but we get to. Do we want to? And when we choose to submit, that's when we come before Him. And when we choose to submit, the beautiful thing is God partners with us. His truth comes to live in us. And this is such a gift, because it's also such a curse, because now I have no excuse. Now I know the truth and I know I'm doing wrong. But that's literally the definition of freedom. Before Jesus, you were going to sin. Whether you were self-righteous or completely depraved, you were just going to sin. After Jesus, you know right from wrong. But now the responsibility is on us to choose righteousness. Joshua says to the tribes of Israel when they come into the promised land, he says, choose you today. Who will you serve? It's your choice. He says, choose life. He says, I encourage you to choose life. But He says, it's up to you. You can choose death. And we know that throughout our day, there are moments where we choose life, but then sometimes we choose death. But this is God's love, mercy, and grace. Through Jesus Christ, there is a second chance every single minute of the day. We can come back in alignment with God.
I even get into a relationship with a friend, a woman, and at that point I didn't care. I was just like, you know what? It is what it is. My relationship with God is just like, the love is so loud, but the disappointment is also so loud. I'm just like, how do I reconcile these two worlds? And I remember the one time, the thing that kind of just broke me, just like sweetly broken, you know. I was having sexual relations with this woman, and in the middle of the rustle and tussle, God speaks to me. Like while I am in bed with another person, and he says, "Do you trust me?" And I was just like, how dare you be speaking to me? Not like how dare you, like you shouldn't, but like you shouldn't even be looking at me right now. How could you, you know? And he was like, but do you trust me? Do you trust me to get you out of this? Okay, Lord, you said this. I'm not gonna do a thing. You do it. And my relationship with God continued to suffer for another like 6 months. But it suffered for freedom. It suffered for freedom. I don't know if it makes sense. Like, I was still in pain. I still felt like the scum of the earth. I still felt like the disappointment child, which confirmed things that had been said to me from my childhood and all that kind of stuff. But I still felt all these things. But like, remembering God coming to me, I was just like, if he could speak to me there in that place, I must be worth something. And you must be more powerful than I even thought. I know that you're more powerful than I can even imagine.
So much of mental health is about bad patterns, which turn into bad habits, which turn into just, this is where I'm trapped. I'm frustrated in my own life, and now I'm frustrated with God because he's not fixing me. I'm disappointed, I'm upset. That's real. We're human. Read the Psalms. Read Psalm 77. People get really freaked out at God. But he's not the problem. And it's not that we're the problem. The problem is simply our thinking. Because relationship with God is the opposite. It's also about building patterns, healthy ones, good ones, that then become good habits of our life. But it's more than habits. It's about the relationship. Do you know that God doesn't just love you, he likes you? Can you think about that on a daily basis? Can you see the good that he's put inside of you, that he wanted there, that he loves about you? And so, again, it becomes this issue of responsibility, of taking responsibility for my own heart before God, to receive his love, to always remember that even when I feel disappointed by him, he is never going to forsake me. He will never leave me alone.
So the thing with mental illness is that you've got to have structure in your daily life. You've got to get up at a certain time, have breakfast at a certain time. If you're blessed enough to go to a caring home, like I was, it's beneficial to have therapy classes that develop your cognitive ability, your thinking ability. And by the way, cognitive ability diminishes with age and mental illness. So these therapy classes are designed to improve one's cognitive ability, and it's all about structure at the end of the day. I'm full of hope for the future. I know that my destiny doesn't lie in the caring home. Thanks be to Jesus, that is the Lord Jesus, that is giving me hope and giving me power to overcome this illness, which is schizophrenia. Is a cruel illness. I just want to add that I was not on drugs. Usually you get schizophrenia through two ways, either through drugs or through stress, and mine was stress related. A lot of people are drug related, they get schizophrenia.
So in recent studies that I'm doing in my counseling course, I discovered something called the diathesis stress model. And it's a model that answers where mental health issues actually come from. And so a diathesis is just a condition. It's a pre-existing condition. It could be a genetic condition. It could be something that the individual picks up in their own lives. But the idea is that that condition isn't set to manifest until there is some kind of stress that hits their lives. So people with a genetic condition and genetic propensity, it's the stress that creates the conditions that then manifest the mental health problem, which includes drug addiction. So for example, somebody who grew up in a home with a parent who took drugs, genetically would most probably have a disposition to become a drug addict themselves at some point in their life. But what science has shown and what the research proves to us is there are people with the genetic condition who create optimal environments and then never manifest the condition, for example, drug addiction. But there are people with a milder propensity for the problem occurring whose environment then becomes so stressful that they absolutely do manifest the condition. So this helps us understand that it's a very complicated interplay of genetics, of environment, and obviously as Christians of our social and our spiritual spaces that can help manifest conditions. But for me as a pastor, as a counselor, I think the real issue is stress. We live in a very stressed world and things become so stressful. You know, the Bible tells us that we should be responsible for ourselves, for our own hearts. I preached recently on guard your heart above all else, for from it are the sources of life. And this is what it's talking about. I have the greatest authority over my own life, even more than God. We don't like hearing that as Christians. God is absolutely sovereign, but He honors your free will. He honors my free will more than we do. And so we get to choose and decide how we live our lives. So we literally carry the greatest authority for our lives, which means we should be the most responsible for our lives. And for me, there are two places where stress really, really manifests in my life. The first one is when I'm not being responsible for myself. The first one is when I'm behaving badly, just doing whatever I want without any consideration of how it's going to affect me or somebody else. The second place, however, is when I'm trying to control others. Because here's the truth, right? If I hold the most responsibility for my own life, that means other people should be holding the greatest responsibility for their lives. But we do this thing where we want to control situations and circumstances. We want to control other people. We want to bend them to our will. And that is very, very stressful. And so what the Bible tells us is that we should work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. That's not about effort and performance. What that is about submitting to God, about submitting our own hearts and then being responsible with our own hearts before God. And then when we run into people that we might want to love or want to invite into our lives, when we realize that they're not doing that, we need to leave them alone with Jesus so they can figure out how to work out their salvation with fear and trembling.